Good day everyone and welcome to our General Mathematics class. I am Ma'am Shirley and for today's discussion, we are going to have domain and range. Let's start. So let us first define domain and range. When we say domain, this is the set of all permissible values of x. So when we say permissible, ano-ano lang ba ang pwede nating i-substitute na values sa ating functions? So we know that only real numbers can be included in the domain to get the corresponding y values. So this will not include undefined as well as imaginary numbers. So undefined is a result of division by 0, and then imaginary numbers are a result of getting the square root of a negative number. So these are what we call the restrictions that we need to consider. So the domain are also known as the input values or the x values. On the other hand, the range is a set of resulting values, also known as the second components or the y values. Let us have an example. Let's say we have a set of ordered pairs, such as this one. The domain consists of the x values, or the first values. So in this case, we will be having 1, 2, and 3. That will consist our domain. For the range, let us check the second components, or the y values, and that will be 2, 3, and 4. Giving us a range of 2, 3, and 4 written this way. Another example, let's say we have this one, 4, 2, 5, 2, and 6, 2. Of course, again, the first values 4, 5, and 6 will consist our domain, while for the range, we have a single value, 2, since we can see that all the elements of the domain is paired with this number. Now let us have this 1. So we can see here graph representing a function. To identify the domain, let us see the x values included in the graph. So since we have the domain, we're going to consider our x values. So checking our graph. So we have here, let us check the endpoint of our graph. So mula siya dito, and then saan sa x-axis siya nakatapat. That will be from negative 3 going to that one, positive 5. Okay? So how are we going to write the domain? So for our domain, we can say that x such that x is greater than or equal to negative 3 but less than or equal to positive 5. Now, let us have our range. So for the range, we're going to do the same. So we're going to check our, this time, y-axis. So we're going to check the y values that are included in the graph. So with this one, tingnan uli natin saan siya nakatapat. For this particular example, the endpoint here, as you can see, if we're going to check dun sa ating y-axis, that will be from negative 2 going to positive 4. Ayan. Okay? So that will be the domain. Rather the range. So with this one, our range will be written this way. So it will be y such that y is greater than or equal to negative 2 but less than or equal to positive 4. Now, how about this one? So as you can see in this graph, our graph here has arrowheads. So the arrowheads indicate that the other arrowheads on both ends of our graph, it indicates that the graph will be extended on both directions. So, since wala naman tayo nakikitang any restriction for this one, and we can see that, again, it is extended on both directions, going to negative infinity and positive infinity, negative infinity and positive infinity for x, as well as negative infinity also and positive infinity for y, we can say that both our domain and range are the set of real numbers, or we can write it as this way. So this symbol here is read as element, and then the symbol here represents the real numbers. So for this one, we can read this as x such that x is an element of R, or the set of real numbers. So the same with our range, we're going to read this as y such that y is an element of R, indicating that our range is a set of real numbers also. Okay, so how about if our given function is represented by its equation, such as this one, y is equal to 5. So if we're going to check the restrictions, wala namang possibility na magkaroon ng 0 sa denominator upon substitution, as well as square root of a negative number. So with this one, we can say that our domain will be the set of real numbers also. So I have here on the left side the graph of our function. So I use here a graphing software. I use Desmos for this one. And so I'm only showing you a portion of the graph. If we're going to zoom it in, so makikita natin na the graph is extended on both directions. So what have you observed with the graph of our function? Ayan. So ang graph natin is a horizontal line. If we are going to look at our y values, we will observe that whatever the value of x is, there will be a constant value of y for this example. So with this one, since we can see that we only have here a constant value 5, we can say that the range of our function will be y such that y is equal to 5. Okay. So next equation, let us have this one. So this is another linear function. So again, wala naman tayong restrictions for the domain. So we can say, ayan, let us look at this one. So again, using our graphing software, we can see the behavior of our graph. It will be extended on both directions. So we can see any restriction in our domain. So pwede natin sabihin na ang domain ng ating function ay all real numbers. So x such that x is an element of R. And then for the range, as you can see, still it will be this one. Since again, the graph is extended on both directions, if we're going to check our y values here, so we can see that it will be from negative infinity going to positive infinity. Therefore, again, our range will be y such that y is an element of R, or the set of real numbers. Okay, next example, let us have this one. So this is a second degree function, also known as a quadratic function. So we know that the graph of a quadratic function is a parabola. So let's check its graph. So the graph will look like this one. Okay, so Do you have any possible restrictions for this one, such as having a zero in the denominator or the square root of a negative number? The answer is no. Since we do not have any restrictions, it's safe to say that our domain will be the set of real numbers, x such that x is an element of R. Now, what about the range of this function? So let us check the range of this function using our graph. Let's check it graphically. So with this one, this is a parabola that opens upward, and we can see that if the parabola opens upward, it will have a minimum point. So the minimum point is the turning point of the parabola. So we can say that this turning point, ito na yung lowest possible value na pwedeng magkaroon ang ating function. So check natin. So y value does it correspond? So tingnan natin saan siya nakatapat, and that will be negative 3. So that will be negative 3, and since we can see that our parabola opens upward, it will be all values going up to positive infinity. Okay? So with this one, we can say that the range of this function will be all values greater than or equal to negative 3. Now that we know how to get the range of a quadratic function graphically, how about if we're going to do it by solving? Okay? So we will be using this formula. So using the same example, we have y is equal to x squared plus 8x plus 13. We were able to come up with the range of y such that y is greater than or equal to negative 3. So again, if we're going to solve for this one, we will be using this formula. So with this, it depends on the value of a as to what inequality symbol are you going to use. So kapag ang value daw ng a ay greater than 0, we're going to make use of the symbol here, greater than or equal to this particular value here. 4ac minus b squared all over 4a. Kapag naman ang value ng a ay less than 0, we are going to use the other inequality symbol less than or equal to 0. Still, we will be using the same formula as to obtain the value that we will be needing para sa pagsulat ng ating range. Bigyang emphasis lang natin na pagka sinabi natin na a is greater than 0, that will be positive. And if a is less than 0, a is negative. So, ano yung sinasabi natin na value ng a with this one? So, our given quadratic function here is written in the form y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. So, we can easily identify the corresponding values for a, b, and c from our example. So, let us try to solve. Tingnan natin. Kapag ba sinolve natin, we will still come up with this value negative 3 using this formula. Let's see. So, we will be using this expression for ac minus b squared all over 4a. So, our values for a, b, and c are a is equal to 1, b is equal to 8, and c is equal to 13. So, upon substituting the values to our expression, so we'll have 4 times 1 times 13 minus the square of 8 all over 4 times 1. Simplifying this further, we will have 4 times 1 times 13, that will be 52, minus the square of 8 will be 64, all over 4 times 1 is 4. So 52 minus 64 will give us negative 12, all all over 4. And negative 12 divided by 4 will be negative 3, giving us a value the same as what we have a while ago. Okay? So that will be how to get the range of a quadratic function graphically and by solving. Okay, so let us have the last example. So we have here y is equal to the square root of x plus 4. So we have here a radical function with a linear expression in the radicand. Okay, so is there a possible restriction for this one? The answer is yes. So kung babalikan natin yung ating discussion kanina, sabi natin ang mga restrictions will be division by 0, that will give us undefined, and then the square root of a negative number, which will give us an imaginary number. So dito tayo, no? So square root of a negative number, that will be the restriction that we are going to check. So let us see how the graph of this function behaves using our graphing software. Ayan. So kung mapapansin natin with this one, we have here an endpoint at negative 4, and then we have here extending on one direction. Ayan. So, with this one, based on this graph, we can easily identify our domain. So, just by looking at this one, we can see that our x values will be from negative 4 going to positive infinity. Ayun siya. So, positive infinity. So, tama din naman. Kasi if we will be getting values less than negative 4, such as, let's say, negative 5. So if we're going to substitute here to our function, that will be negative 5 plus 4. That will be the square root of negative 1, and that will give us an imaginary number. So yun yung restriction na kailangan nating i-check dito. So based on this one, we can say that our domain will be x such that x is greater than or equal to negative 4. Okay. So, since we were able to identify the domain graphically, how are we going to find the domain? By solving. So, to find the domain of this radical function with a linear expression in the radicand, we can get the domain by using this one. So, x such that x is greater than or equal to negative b over a. Okay, so negative b over a, this radical function here is written in the form a x plus b, giving us ang value ng b natin ay 4, and then ang value ng a natin is 1. So if we're going to solve, that will be negative b, our b is 4, divided by 1, that will give us negative 4, which is the same as our answer here. Okay? Now, how about our range? So, for our range naman, we're going to, of course, look at our y values. So, for the y values, as you can see, again, we have the endpoint here. So, the corresponding y value niya, saan siya nakatapat sa y-axis, of course, dito siya sa 0, going up to positive infinity. So, for our range, we can say that y such that y is greater than or equal to 0 for the y values. Okay? So, with this one, bakit siya greater than or equal to 0? Wala na bang ibang possible values that we can have for this one, for the range? So, the answer here, as long as we do not have any sign here before the radical symbol, it indicates that it is positive. Therefore, ang ating range will be greater than or equal to 0. Kasi nga naman, if we're going to get the square root of 0, kasi in this case, we have, if the least possible value that we can substitute here in our function is negative 4, and then plus 4, that will give us the square root of 0, and the square root of 0 is 0. Therefore, all values that we can have here will be real numbers greater than or equal to 0. Okay, to summarize our discussion, let me show you this table. So as you can see here, for the first three functions, so we have here linear function in the form y is equal to k, also known as a constant function, and then a linear function in the form y is equal to mx plus b, and for a quadratic function, the domain will be the same. And that is the set of real numbers since we do not have any restrictions in the domain. So, nagkakaroon lang siya ng pagkakaiba-iba dito sa ating range. So, if it is a constant function, y is equal to k, our range will be y such that y is equal to that given value of k. So, kung ano yung nakabigay na value natin dito ng k will be the value that we will be writing on our range. So, for the second one naman, y is equal to mx plus b, if that's the form, so ang ating range will be all real numbers lang din. Okay? So, for the third one, we have here quadratic function. Our range will be, again, it will depend on the value of a, whether if it is positive or negative. So, we're going to make use of the greater than or equal to symbol or the less than or equal to symbol. And of course, the value needed for our range will be obtained by using this formula for AC minus B squared all over 4A. And lastly, for our radical function with a linear expression in the radicand such as this one, our domain can be obtained by identifying first the value of negative B over a, and then writing it as x such that x is greater than or equal to that value, kung ano man yung value masasolve natin. And then for the range, that will be greater than or equal to 0 because the least possible value that we can have inside the radicand will be 0. And the square root of 0 again is 0. Okay? And that ends our discussion. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you again in our next discussion.